Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on the roundtable. I was thinking that we can talk more about some unconventional strategies for programming, kind of just going through like case studies that we've all done and how it's kind of different to the norm, or maybe it looks like it's different to the norm, but it actually ended up working really well.
So, like, what's an approach that you would go and go, fuck, I've never done this before. What am I doing? Or, like, what do we consider that these days?
Yeah.
I think starting off, like what we used to think was conventional is like, and even now is almost considered old school, which is like linear periodization with like reps slowly dropping down percentage based. But I think if we take it one step further now that everyone's kind of accepted that it can work, however, there's something better, which is like RPE based. Now the conventional approach is like RPE based, right? And so what I consider unconventional is when we consider a lifter's leverages, we have like the assumptions of, okay, when we're presented with this kind of person, with these kinds of leverages, male, female, age, all that, they have this kind of guideline of frequency and volume and intensity that they can work within, and go from there. However, once you start working with them, it may or may not work.
Yeah. So like we're not really, when we're talking about conventional anymore, we're bypassing linear periodization because that's like kind of old school, right? We're talking more about how RPE, because we like to use RPE, DEP in programming. We're talking about how we can manipulate that with what we know about an athlete to get results, not just straight RPE anymore. So kind of straight RPE, like top set at 6 with 4x3 back downs at 6 is kind of like what we would consider conventional now, right?
Yeah, I think as well, like it might not even be the fact of like linear versus RPE. It could literally just be that you're trying something different that you might not have done before. So like it's unconventional to the strategies that you have used before.
Yeah.
Like whether that's what everyone else does or like, just going against the grain of what you have done before. So it's like thinking outside your own box, which I think that I've done quite a lot, within the past year is like literally just trying things on my own with my athletes and seeing whether it works or not. And then just having that conversation afterwards, whether it works, great. Like it ended up doing what we wanted. But then if it didn't, then having that conversation saying, like, yes, we tried this and we now know that like either it works or we know where to go from here.
Yeah. I think that's just how we get better, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I guess it's figuring out outlier responders, right? Who respond differently to everything else that we kind of think they should respond to, and then it's like, okay, no, they don't. Like I can touch on things where I've had someone that does 2 sets of squats a week, and they've responded really, really well to it. It was ridiculous. Yeah. It was like a top set, and then next set repeat load AMRAP. That was it for the whole week. That's all they squatted.
Yeah. And how did you come to that realization that that's all that they're going to respond for that? And how did you control the AMRAP?
It was just because any more stimulus and they would get some kind of injury, or it would just hurt too much. So I was like, I need to get enough workload in here to try and drive progression, but I need you to be healthy, because we know when someone's healthy, they perform better anyway.
Yeah.
So it was like, and they just couldn't handle 2 days a week. 2 days a week was far too much, and just like doing too much in one session was too much as well. So it needs to be almost the bare minimum, but we need to push the edge every single session that they do squat.
Yeah. Just asking, was this a male or a female athlete, or in what weight class was this athlete in?
A male, and I think they weren't really tied to a weight class. It was like under 100 or something.
Okay, cool. So you would assume that that if you went from conventional methods that they could handle 2 to 3 days squatting a week easy.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that where you started off and then you came to this point?
Yeah, I think every single kind of unorthodox method that we take through programming comes from we've tried what we think is the traditional manner in which someone should progress, and we think that's going to be right, and then it's not. So we have to veer away from that. And I think that's how we also figure out everyone's kind of individual program as well, is over time.
Yeah. You're not gonna, like, you might not start, like, say you start with someone, you might not start with the unconventional method. You start more with a, not basic, but something you've done before, or with a lifter who's similar to them, but then you figure out whether that actually works for them or not. So then you then have to kind of think outside the box and be like, okay, maybe this isn't working, or maybe this that I've never tried before is going to work.
Yeah, I would
100%.
never start unconventional. Like there's no reason to back that, right? Like you'd start conventional with, like, say RPE and then back downs, and then kind of go through that and see what happens after that. And if problems arise, like Steve said, like injury, or potentially you might even figure out something that you think if you ran, it might run better. I think those are the two kind of leeways that would lead you to take something unconventional.
Well, I think the hardest part is too, though, for Steve and I, because of the type of athletes that we work with. We'll have athletes coming to us with their full microcycle saying, this is what works. And I've had athletes come to me with that, and then I've had to figure out what is actually responding in this microcycle. That I found that to be quite challenging, because it hasn't come from my own brain, and I haven't figured that out myself. The athlete's telling me what works.
Yeah, like so they've bought into the program, but you're struggling to buy into the program that the previous coach has written as well.
Or they've written themselves. Because it's like, okay, all right, you know, a great example of mine is a 105 kilo guy who squats heavy 3 days a week and does singles 3 days a week. So like I had to figure out which one was stimulating which one. Yeah. And and that took a while.
Yeah, so it's like not actually working in your box. It's like you're starting already somewhere else, so then you have to get into yours and then go from there.
Yep. It's been really tough.
Yeah.
Because it's the opposite way around, because I didn't see what didn't work first. I'm only seeing what he's saying does work, and it does work, but I didn't see what didn't work.
Yeah.
Would you say like an unconventional approach is more likely to happen with like the higher level you go?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you find you have to use an unconventional approach for people who aren't at that high level though?
Again, it goes on with what is unconventional. So both Steve and I and you, all of us are using top sets and stuff like that throughout the week now. Is that what's considered unconventional? Are we putting that in the unconventional box?
Let's say we can define conventional as using like a top set, and then you would go into a higher rep with back downs. That's the same kind of rep range. So let's say, for example, like top single followed by 3 sets of 5, something like that.
Yeah.
Let's define it as that for now.
Okay. All right. Good. Then yes.
You'd use that for like mid-level lifters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're still progressing.
Well, it just depends on what they need at that time. So I got an athlete now, 77, 78 kilo female, who was off training for a full month, sick, did nothing, came back, and then 8 weeks out, and I've run her, started her primary on sets of 5 for 2 weeks. This is primary squat, sets of 4 for 2 weeks, triples for 2 weeks. Then I'll run a doubles, and then I'll go singles for only a few weeks, only 2 to 3 weeks in, and just run momentum in the whole way, because she doesn't have anything to pull from.
Yep. For sure.
It's not something repeatable. I couldn't do it again, but it's working for this, and she's about to PR, all-time PR. Yeah. It's only because that's what's going to work. I couldn't go straight into singles. She'd fail.
Yeah.
There's no a whole month off of nothing. Yeah. So I'm just running momentum in the whole way.
Yeah. Would you say like unconventional situations lead to unconventional like programming? Because you wouldn't really think of these ways of thinking unless the situation like arises where you kind of need to think outside the box, right? Like say if everything's moving really smooth, there's nothing wrong with the conventional approach. It's still quite new in the way that we're defining it, like RPE and then backdowns. Like, whereas say a year or 2 years ago, conventional would have been defined as like linear periodization with like percentage based, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong with the conventional approach. It's just once it doesn't work anymore, what can you do? How can you troubleshoot?
Yeah, that's usually where it comes from. For me, at least, I've found. Like, I've tried something and like then I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't working. So I need to, I don't know, try something else, something different, something that I haven't done before. And I think I've learned from like all my mentors along the way, but I think just me and my own programming, I'm just trying things on my own, like whether I've learned that from someone else or not. Yeah.
Do you have an example?
So like I actually made or am making a YouTube video of this lifter who went into Commonwealth, and her taper was quite unconventional in the way that it usually is set out. So like if she was competing on a Tuesday, so we had to line everything up so that she felt best on the Tuesday. So the way that I did this, she's been working with me for quite a long time, so I've got quite a lot of data already from her previous like competitions. So I already had an idea of what I wanted to change from her nationals peak, because I knew that her deadlift, her last deadlift was like 5 days out from comp, but I think she needed to deadlift closer. But considering that, she also, her last heavy deadlift was 13 days out, which is quite a long time for a small lifter. She's like under 69. So I feel like that's quite a long time out. But yeah, so I ended up having to change the training days around so that each lift could show up at the right time on the Tuesday, knowing based on like her previous competitions how many days out she needed to do each lift. So I guess that's different to how you would usually do it, where you would, I guess, shift the whole program earlier in the block so that you didn't end up having to change the training days in the taper.
I think I used to, back in the day, used to do that with Sam in the peak, change the training days, but it didn't really work for him because he was too big, too much fatigue.
Yeah, so I guess her being smaller, maybe it was easier to change the training days, and she still performed, like she had a really good performance.
Yep. On that note, with like tapering and stuff, like as you mentioned with Sam, I think potentially keeping the days the same, knowing that they're going to have like that extra day or two of rest, I think is quite beneficial. That's something that I've been changing my mind on recently as well. Like it's good to have predictability and making sure like performance is up at the bottom end of the week. So when we do taper, it's like, you know, you can expect them to have some sort of performance, but doesn't necessarily all have to sit on that same day. Like it makes it predictable, but it's not impossible when you do taper them. That's what I've been thinking about recently. And like, I guess it's causing me to like change my mind about things, what I considered conventional, and then now it's flipping back. But there's a lot of things that can work, I feel.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Nearly anything can work to an extent. If there's enough buy-in from an athlete, any kind of unorthodox approach will work. And it's like, it happens over time. We build that up. And it's like, it tapers itself. Like we can touch on tapers, like tapers are completely individual all the time as well. Like, I think even for yourself, Danny, like we've ran sets of 8 in a taper week before.
Yeah.
Like how many people do that? That's very unorthodox.
Yeah. I think
how many days out?
Deadlift. 3 days out, 3 or 4 days out. Sets of 8.
I think that just comes back to listening to where the athlete is in that time, you know, going, I need that stimulus 3 to 4 days out to perform still. Whereas in another taper, he might not need that stimulus to perform. He might be too cooked, or
Yeah.
might need something else. Like, that's just knowing where the athlete is on that time and understanding what fatigue, what makes them, where they are with their fatigue and what makes them perform.
Yeah. What's
Yeah.
actually happened in the whole block? Like you said, they might have enough fatigue to drop, the intensity, the volume back. But that's where the communication is so important in that taper, to know how much they actually need.
Yeah, for sure. Like
Definitely.
if someone's fresh and then you taper them like 90%, they're screwed.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really important to be very situational with how they're tapering. I think one unconventional approach that I've like taken, and I guess it's very heavily influenced from the way like Steve's discussed like James' program. Like he's found it to be very productive to have like really high rep squat sets. And I have a lifter who's got quite similar leverages. And although I don't want to jump the gun and like do the exact same kind of prescription that James would run, that Steve would run, coming from that, I've slowly tried to adopt like higher reps over time. And so when we first started, it was like, you've got your top set, you've got the back downs all at the same reps. And to slowly inch our way towards that, on the second back down, say like he's doing a set of 5 at RP6, and he'll do 2 sets of 5 minus a percentage, right? Instead of dropping it to sets of 5, I've dropped it to like sets of 7, all at the same percentage. So now we're slowly biasing towards higher reps, but still keeping that like heavy-ish work that we've known to like work. I think the conventional approach would have been like, completely just changing the rep ranges and trying to find it that way. And I think it could work, but this way is taking data from what's worked and putting my spin on it in a way that's going to, that's helped in the past and from what I've heard.
Yeah.
So you're
It's also
going based
building.
on.
You go.
Sorry, you're going based off what Steve's done, which is already unconventional, but you're trying it on your lifter.
Yeah, for sure. Like trying it whilst understanding that my lifter is not James. Like they're two completely different athletes, right? So if I were to not understand the reasoning behind why Steve would program in that way, I would just misapply it and give the exact same prescription and it might just fail.
Yeah.
So are you giving this prescription on a primary or a secondary day?
Primary day.
So that's different to how Steve
Higher
does it
reps.
anyway.
Higher reps, yeah.
His high reps, James's high reps are on a secondary day.
This guy's running quite high reps, not as high as James. So I don't think it would be like within the reps of like 10, 12, 14, but it's still quite high with the mind of like building strength, right? Because like let's dive back a couple years back and we'll say like strength building reps are like 3 to 5 reps
and below,
right?
Yeah.
So he's sitting quite high and his estimated 1RM is still climbing. So it's like, all right, as long as we just ensure his fatigue is managed week to week and block to block, if we stay around this rep range, we should be good.
So what are you doing on the secondary day then?
High bar 7s or 6s.
So you got two high rep days.
Yeah. And
okay,
I've
cool.
controlled, like he's not pushing like heavy. Nothing's like a grinder. And it's working. So as long as I keep him here, we should be good.
Yeah. Interesting.
How have you worked with your lifters, Kelly? Like what's a recent one that's been of mind to you?
I guess the recent one was the one I posted about last night with Tori with her peak, and just understanding how to replace fatigue debt in a peak, and understanding how that relates to the taper. I think that's been a big one that I've worked on recently. And then another one is going to 3 days of squats for Sam.
Yep.
So, and then controlling the fatigue in 2 of the days and seeing what happens for the primary day. I think those are the 2 big unconventional ones at the moment. I think experiences I had last year with a couple of peaking athletes helped me to think outside the box really quickly with Tori, but I'd had experiences in the past with having to think on the fly in the peak, so that helped really quickly. Obviously I had Steve there to run it by as well. But I think with Tori, because she's so small, it was just about basically replacing what she'd lost for 3 weeks out, and doing it in a manner that wasn't going to create too much fatigue acutely, which would screw over squatting. So just figuring out where to put that, and then prescribing based on what she had been hitting in that block earlier and the block before, and taking the prescription of and taking that from percentages to run it through into the competition. That's the biggest one that I've worked on recently. And I think with Sam, it's like, okay, we're adding frequency, but now I need to figure out what that stimulus needs to look like.
Yeah. And he's coming from a place where he wasn't doing enough, correct?
I don't think so. No, he wasn't doing enough. Not enough. The secondary day was 2 capped.
Yeah, for sure.
2 capped. Didn't move for over a year. Couldn't move. Need to figure out how to get more stimulus without it. You know, and I've added things like belt squat back in again. So just overall more stimulus before the primary day. So it's 2 sets of high bar and then 4 sets of belt squat that have gone back in again. And that'll tell me pretty quickly whether or not that's going to work.
Yep.
With Tori, because that was the first time you've ever done that with someone, adding in like that extra day.
Second time.
So did you base it off the first time that you did it?
Yeah, I had to do it with Meg going to Worlds in 2022. Yeah. So she peaked too early, and I needed to keep the fatigue around, or else she was going to detrain. Same premise, but wasn't injured.
Yeah, okay. So you already had done it before, so you've taken that kind of...
Did it before, this time was better.
Was there something that you changed from the first time to make it better?
The first time, I believe I added in singles. And I believe I added in singles later in the week of deadlifts. This time we added in doubles, which were ramping, earlier in the week. Of course, it's situational, but I found adding the doubles in earlier in the week was better because it created momentum for the rest of the week.
Right. Rather than having it later in the week, it kind of didn't do as much for the momentum.
Yeah, and given that I was able to look back on that with what happened with Meg, it worked. She still did what she did in training on the platform. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's what you want. It just could have been more if she didn't peak earlier. I would have, if I had my time over with it again, I would have gone similar to what I've done with Tori and prescribed, not just singles. They didn't do enough.
Right. Yeah. So
but
you would
still
again.
Yeah, it still had its effect though. It still worked on a fact that she could do what she did in training on the platform in train. And what she still performed to a standard that she was hitting in training. It wasn't the highest she hit in training, but she still left kilos on the platform, but it was not tons. She still had a good performance.
Yeah. So your initial prescription with Meg, for example, like the goal was to try and maintain strength. Hence why you ran singles. You didn't want to like add too much fatigue versus the situation with Tori. Like if the listeners haven't like seen the post or just know about her situation, it was like she just couldn't do the work due to injury. And so you had to figure out a way to add extra workload in.
Yes. 100%. Whereas Meg was just about trying to keep strength through the platform.
I guess injuries are like a big one where you have to think outside the box because not every injury is going to be the same. Or
I think it was lucky that I had done a lot of groundwork with her on the injury in the previous block, and it was a very straightforward lower back doesn't like to flex under load type injury, which is very easy to improve if you know what you're doing and you know where the deficits are. It was within days, it was feeling better. But then the second injury, that really threw a spanner in the works in terms of now I really have to change things. I could have, if the second one didn't happen 3 weeks out, I could have run it normally.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But once the second one happened, it was like, oh no. Once you missed the second primary day, it was like, oh no. Then now
you got to do something.
Now I need to change things. Yeah. It was just prescription too, like in terms of keeping it at a level that she could perform. Like that's why I said in that post that I prescribed the last secondary day deadlifts, because I knew if I didn't, it would have been overshot.
Yeah. So knowing the lifter.
And that would have ended things early as well. And that's essentially what happened going into Worlds 2022. It was just overshot.
Yeah.
And then I'll take blame for that one as well, because I wasn't communicating well enough for that not to happen, and I wasn't putting in things that I learned from that, which is prescription where it needs to be, and load management throughout the week properly. So I don't think it was. I definitely don't. I would probably take more responsibility for that situation happening from me, because I should be able to control I should be able to have enough communication with my athlete and know what stimulus. I had enough time to know what stimulus was working, and I didn't put that in practice early enough. So that's why that happened. So it was very lucky that I could think outside the box and have the help of the other boys around here to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So again, that's just been situations where it's happened before, where I go, oh, I've done this before, I know what to do.
Yeah. I guess that's where like you can do as much as you can as a coach, but like you have to know what the lifter is thinking and feeling, because if they don't have the buy-in, or if they aren't communicating enough, the change that you make might not actually end up being the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's just understanding that also it's okay to screw up.
It's how you learn. That's what I've learned, at least. And then knowing where you need to go from there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
If you stay conventional, you never learn. Like you just learn how to keep running the same plan.
Well, I think that was what was wrong with the program going into Worlds anyways. It was too conventional. You had three squats, and it was squats that was mostly overshot because it was just too heavy, because it wasn't low prescribed properly. It got to the end of the peak, and all of the days were lower, higher intensity, lower volume. And now I'm running 9s in the taper. Do you know what I mean? So it just wasn't what that athlete was going to respond to at that time. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's where it all comes down to it being so individualized and how unorthodox things can be for a particular individual, right? So it's not like traditional in a way. I was like, okay, I got the heuristics for this person. I know how, like, let's say a 74 kilo male squats 2 to 3 times a week. I know exactly how they should kind of respond. But then we have an outlier who, we got Danny's example of a 74 kilo who only squats once a week, right? And it's just acknowledging that with that person and how they respond. And then that's how we get this unorthodox or unconventional kind of approach with that person. So it's just individualized kind of programming. I don't think it's unconventional. It's just that we're paying attention and acknowledging how each individual responds.
Yeah, I think I've stopped going. I used to think like, I'd go, why can't this lifter perform? Like, and then I'd go, but I'm, let's just say that they're a small female and I'm squatting them 3 times a week and they're not making any progress. And I'd be like in my head, but they're doing 3 times a week. Why aren't they making any progress? And then I stopped thinking like that. and I started thinking like, okay, what can I do to change this?
Yeah.
Because the frequency's right, but something else isn't right.
What does this
Instead
person
of-
actually need?
Yeah, instead of going, why aren't they responding? Because then I'm putting it into it's their fault. Whereas no, really, if my athletes aren't responding or my athletes aren't getting stronger and they're training and they're communicating with me, that's my problem.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing something right. So I when I shifted my mindset from why aren't they doing this to more of what do I need to do to get them to respond, then I instantly improved my programming by far.
Yeah, for sure.
Does that,
Yeah, it's
so that
knowing when you
mindset
need,
change.
yeah, when you need to step in as a coach to change it.
Yeah, it was just a mindset shift for me.
Yeah.
You know, thinking that, oh, okay, small female, 3 times a week, high intensity, low volume towards the end of the competition, that's going to work. And then it doesn't. And instead of me going, why isn't that working? They should be working for them, and then giving it to them again. I go, okay, so I didn't do something right.
Yeah, it's acknowledging the good and the bad, right?
Yeah.
What worked and what didn't work. I think tapers are the most
Yeah.
individual still.
Oh, 100%.
That's where we've gone away from the most of like, you know, we still got people that, you know, you get your openers at one point and your last warm-ups or something in your taper week, but it's not like that anymore, right? Someone responds to it in a specific kind of, I guess, rep range or intensity or something like that. They need that in that week, else they're just going to be fucking detrained when they get on the platform and they're going to feel like shit.
Yeah.
It's taking it from like previous performances as well. That's like with my example. I wouldn't have known for her to have her last heavy deadlift 13 days out if I hadn't had those, like the data from her previous comps, and knowing that it hadn't worked before, so I had to change something in that taper. Yeah.
I think
It's hard to, sorry, there you go.
I think another word you can use to replace unconventional in this sense is just being adaptable. Like once you can see what's happening right in front of you, being quick enough to make the right adjustment. Because like everyone's going to course correct, everyone's got different situations, people change. So being able to jump in and knowing the exact tool that you need to use to get them to respond is helpful. And sometimes the tool that we've learned just isn't the right tool.
Yeah, and like, you know, I say this frequently, is that when it comes to being adaptable as a coach, and when you've got your programming skills, they do get better over time, and you don't know what you don't know. So I did fall into a trap before years ago where I would repeat the same process expecting a different result. And, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, when Steve first came on, he would tell me things like, once you've got the formula, you can see the changes really quickly, and squats run on their own microcycle and stuff like that. And I'd go away when I'd hear that, and I'd think about it for ages, and then I'd get it right and go, okay, now I understand. I can actually change someone's performance weekly now, not over a block. And understand what that actual stimulus needs. Like Leanne's squats are a great one. The stimulus in these squats is so sensitive that we are even finding it really difficult to have any type of volume drop or deload right now. So we got to find the stimulus that works on that secondary day to keep that primary day strong, but then not go too hard, but then not go too light.
Yeah, well, that's me, right?
Yeah, that's you, and it's so many people. But then once you actually open your mind up to what that stimulus can be and can't be, it's like, oh shit, now I can actually make performance so predictable week to week, not block to block.
Yeah, that's why I always go like, I don't deload. It's not a deload. It's a little bit lighter than what I did a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think even this block though, hey, we hardly deloaded.
Yeah, like not
And
at
you're
all.
like,
Well,
and you're like,
until
I feel
last
fine.
week, and then it was like, oh,
Yeah.
this doesn't feel great. But
But
that's where we know.
It wasn't massive though. It was like 10 kilos.
Yeah, it wasn't. No.
All up.
Yeah, it was the
tiny.
tiniest bit, and it changed
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's where also, like,
So-
as an athlete, being able to communicate how it's feeling, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to make the change.
And acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And understand, even when it's acknowledging it in a negative light, being like, oh, okay, I know why I'm weak today. Whereas that's really hard to acknowledge on any level, and then the communication gets lost, and then we end up changing things, and it's like we shouldn't change things to start with. We should have kept going.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very interested to see how your athlete with two high rep days goes, Danny.
We'll see. It's going well. We'll see.
Is it?
Yeah, it's going well. He's hitting PRs across both days. As long as I don't get him to overshoot, I think we'll be sweet. We'll get him milk out the gains.
Is this how big is this athlete?
He's 83.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. Very, very
very
similar leverages to Steve's athlete. So like short femur. The reason why I ran this way is because he had really, really, really short femurs. And I was like the way he's squatting is just up down. I was like, wow, okay, like we can milk something out if we just go high reps, keep it sub-maximal. I was like, oh, that's James. That's James.
And I think taking leverages into consideration is really good to either think outside the box or stay in a box. So like you'd think with both the heavyweights that I've got that they would respond to a really controlled secondary day and then a stimulus on a primary day, and neither of them have. Like it worked for a little while with Sam, but now it's not working.
Yep.
So if I took into consideration, like, if I tried to keep doing that with Jackson, it just didn't work. It didn't work internationals, and it didn't work just then. So I'm scrapping it. I'm going high reps.
Yeah, like I guess I've changed my mind recently about like higher reps. I think the more efficient you are, the more you can take advantage of high reps. Like I think, and I guess it's a hot take, and I don't see it anymore. Like people saying high reps is cardio. I think people that are good at powerlifting and are efficient can take advantage of high reps, but people that aren't so good can leverage more from lower reps by just like spending more sets and like getting good technique that way. But high reps for beginners, I don't think is the way to go for powerlifting.
High reps for beginners.
I don't think is the way to go. And that's my hot take.
That is a hot take.
Because I think,
that is a hot take.
like, I think about like how much percentage or relative intensity that someone can get up to. And if you're really efficient, say like, for example, James or myself, back when I used to deadlift like 90% plus for like 8 reps, right? You can't do that as a beginner until you get really, really efficient. So it's good as a base for building muscle, which works like really, really beginner. It doesn't work as well for intermediates that aren't as efficient and figuring out technique. And then once you get advanced and everything's dialed in, and you no longer need to make those like technical adjustments and just let them do their thing, high reps becomes more of an advantage again, because it's an easier way to accumulate volume.
What do you think about that, Stephen?
Yeah, I understand. That's where you'd lean more on machine work.
Would you just give them more sets, like low volume reps, but just more sets? So then they're still practicing it and they're still getting the volume in, but it's not like a set of 8.
Yeah,
where they lose their technical efficiency.
That could also work. I think within my box right now, I don't program like 5-6 sets for people outside of like a competition prep, but it could be something that I could venture towards. But the way I think about it is having high reps can also control like the maximum amount of loading that you go through. I imagine if like you ran high sets, low reps, they have the ability to like really, really load up, and that could affect like fatigue.
Mm.
But I think
if
I
they're a
want
beginner,
oh yeah, you go.
like if they're a beginner, they might be able to recover easier because then their loads might not be as heavy.
Yeah, for sure. And they
It just
can
depends on the
maintain like
person.
integrity of technique as well for a beginner. Yeah. That's where my head's been at with like high rep stuff. Like that's why I think high reps have been working, especially when you mention people like really good sumo deadlifters, really efficient squatters, really good benchers. Like they all use high reps because if you just ran really high sets with low reps, they'd be in there for like 2-3 hours doing one exercise. 3x10 versus 10x3. It's like not feasible, and they might need that workload. So I think, yeah, that's my hot take. I've just been thinking about high reps.
I don't think it's too much of a hot take.
Yeah, but like I actually haven't heard people say like high rep is cardio anymore.
Are you serious?
Not really.
I can think of a couple of whingy athletes that do.
I don't understand what people mean when they say high reps cardio. That's something that's always confused me because I've always done high reps.
Isn't it just someone whinging about doing high reps? That's what I take it as.
They just get out of breath. That's why they get to fight.
I think that's if we got someone that's like that, right? That's saying like high reps is cardio. I think that's where their technique's going to fall apart too. If they're thinking about that, they're thinking about more about just like being able to get the set done and get it over and done with, where technique will start to fall apart because they're thinking so much about that. Whereas I think what Danny's saying is like, if we program more lower reps, they can be more, I guess, intent with their technique while they're doing that set, because it's only for 3 to 5 reps or something. Whereas if you program 7 to 10, they get past 6 and they start to just like, fuck, I just need to get this over and done with, and they just start trying to just like pump these reps out, but they're not efficient yet. So they're just not good reps.
Are you talking primarily in competition prep or outside competition prep?
I'm talking about in competition prep. Like, is there a use for high rep work? And generally, it would have been like, no, there's no utility. It's better to like drop down reps. And I wouldn't say I wouldn't say to. I might in very rare situations like climb up reps within a comp prep, only if they can manage the percentage, but not to, not generally.
Yep, gotcha. Cool.
I think that's pretty good. If no one else has anything,
I think we covered it. I think the main thing, as Steve said before, is thinking outside of the box and using unconventional methods is just you listening to what your athlete is telling you, what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and then getting creative around that.
For sure. Yep, I agree. Cool.
All right.
All right.
Great. Thanks, guys.
See ya.